A lot of digital nomad advice is accurate, but describing a pretty different version of this lifestyle than the one you might actually find yourself living after a few years. After 12 years and 130 countries, these are the gaps I still see. The things that are technically true, but missing enough context that they might point you in the wrong direction. The first one comes up constantly, especially for people who are just starting out. Southeast Asia is the cheapest place to base yourself. This one feels obviously true. If you look at daily costs in places like Thailand, Vietnam, or Bali, it's hard to argue with it. Food is inexpensive, transportation is inexpensive, and apartments are relatively affordable compared to Western cities. So, on a per-item basis, it really does look like the cheapest option. But that's a daily cost lens, and as a nomad, I was trying to answer a monthly question. And one of the biggest differences is in behavior. When everything is inexpensive, I found myself doing more. Eating out more, booking more experiences, saying yes to things I may have skipped somewhere else. I had a month in Bangkok where I ended up doing a full health checkup that I had been putting off elsewhere because the price was right. These costs are real, but they don't necessarily show up when you're only thinking in terms of daily essentials. Some of my lowest cost months have not been in Southeast Asia. The other big factor is how fast you're moving. Across multiple summers in Bangkok, Bulgaria, my monthly costs have averaged around $1,500, including accommodation, food, and everything else. And part of why that stayed low is because I was in one place the entire time. No long-haul flights, no resets. So, the real answer to whether Southeast Asia is cheap isn't yes or no. It depends on how long you're staying, how fast you're moving, and what you want to do while you're there. The next one is something I hear constantly now in a way that wouldn't have even made sense back when I started in 2014. You can work from anywhere. And this one is more or less true. If you have a laptop and internet, you can get work done from almost anywhere in the world. But I've learned the hard way that not every place works equally well as a base for working. There are places I've spent time in that I would absolutely love to go back to, but that I wouldn't choose to work from long term again. In parts of West Africa, for example, power inconsistency was a major issue. The connectivity was often surprisingly good, but if the power goes out, that doesn't matter much. The cost there is harder to quantify. It shows up as rescheduled calls, lost hours, and the mental overhead of constantly working around something unpredictable. Cape Town is a well-known nomad hub, but load shedding means that power cuts are scheduled across different parts of the city. If you want to guarantee you can work, you're looking for co-working spaces or hotels that have backup power or aren't scheduled for load shedding that day. And that comes at a premium. In Djibouti, the hotel internet wasn't reliable enough to work from. There was a co-working space with better connectivity, but it was around $300 for 2 weeks. Too expensive for us to justify in that case. What we ended up doing instead was buying a local SIM card and running everything off mobile data. That cost came to about $6 per day. There's also the novelty factor, and that can be both a good thing and a bad thing. Every time I arrive somewhere new, I have to figure out the same set of things again. Where to work, how reliable the internet actually is, what my routine looks like. Plus, there are all the new activities to do and foods to try. For a few weeks, that's all part of the experience. But over time, if you're moving too fast, that decision load adds up. What I've found works better is reducing how often I have to figure out the same things from scratch. So yes, you can work from almost anywhere. There are far fewer places where you can do it consistently without friction. And it takes time to get to that point regardless. The third one is probably the most common thing I hear from people who are thinking about making this jump. The hard part is getting started. Quitting your job, giving up your apartment, and booking that first one-way flight all take a lot of effort. But it's something you can clearly see and prepare for. What surprised me is that the difficulty doesn't stop there. It changes shape. For me, the harder part over the long run has been pacing. It doesn't feel as visible, and it doesn't really go away. You're constantly balancing how much you want to see, how much you need to work, and building in some actual rest time. Early on, I was moving every 2 to 4 nights. In my first few months alone, I went to more than 20 cities. Now it it looks more like a mix of slower and faster periods. In slower stretches, I'll stay somewhere for 4 to 8 weeks. In faster periods, usually when we're in more of a vacation mode and working significantly less, we might spend 1 or 2 nights in a city. We take a couple of those trips every year. So, over the course of a full year, it's more like longer anchored stays with bursts of faster movement in between, rather than any single consistent pace. But that shift didn't happen because I wanted to slow down. It happened because the original pace wasn't sustainable, financially or mentally. Even relatively recently, in 2024, I spent about 6 months traveling through West Africa. And the challenge wasn't just the logistics. It was figuring out how to maintain a pace that actually works over time. That's something I'm still actively working on. This one is probably the hardest to evaluate before you're actually in it. You'll know fairly quickly if this lifestyle is right for you. This is true up to a point. Within a few months, I could tell that I enjoyed traveling, working remotely, and not having a fixed home base. But that didn't answer the long-term question. One of the hardest moments I've had in this lifestyle was Christmas 2020. That was 6 years in for me. I wasn't figuring out whether I liked traveling and working remotely anymore by this point. I was far away from everyone I knew during a time of year that's usually about family and being home, and not really by choice. It was 2020. The world was mostly shut down still. It wasn't a normal year for anyone. And that's the part you can't really test the first few months. For me, the honeymoon period lasted about 4 to 5 years, which was longer than I expected. There are also structural things that might only become relevant over time. For me, the big one is that to qualify for certain tax benefits, I can spend a maximum of 35 days in the United States each year. That's not something you can meaningfully evaluate early on. So, I was able to figure out fairly quickly that I liked this lifestyle. But it took much longer to understand what would make it sustainable long term. There's one part of this that none of these misconceptions really get at. I'm not trying to do this lifestyle as cheaply as possible. I prioritize enjoyment, and that does have a real cost. There are months I've spent significantly more than I needed to, purely because I chose the experience over the cheapest option. Flights that cost $700 instead of $300 because the timing worked better. Apartments that are $400 or $600 more per month because they'll make my workday better. Trips to places that are harder to reach, where the logistics alone increase the cost, like my expedition to Somalia and Somaliland in 2025. Those aren't mistakes, they're decisions. But they do mean that my version of this lifestyle is not optimized for the lowest possible number. The other trade-off is that optimal systems sometimes do not survive real life. Sometimes you're meeting people somewhere, or going somewhere seasonal, or following something else that doesn't neatly fit into a plan. So this isn't about finding the cheapest version of this lifestyle. It's about understanding what actually drives the cost so you can choose where you want to spend more. If you want a deeper breakdown of how I actually structure this lifestyle, including the systems, tools, and financial setup I use, I've put together a resource page with everything linked in one place. You'll find it in the description. And if you want more videos about what this lifestyle actually looks like long term, not just how to start, hit subscribe. That's what this channel is about.